without further ado, I'd like to introduce Brian Sakula, back for a second guest in here. He came about 1.5 years ago. Brian was introduced to me from my neighbor, Todd, who's the insurance guy. And you haven't got to speak for downtown yet?
No.
But Andrew will probably try to get him to speak for the downtown chapter, but he did speak for the Woodlands.
Yes.
Right?
Yes.
So we'll welcome Brian and thank you.
Thank you.
You have the floor.
All right. Thanks. Well, thanks for being here, everybody. Now, this is a financial executive networking group, so you may be wondering why we're going to talk about type 2 diabetes today. Hopefully, by the end of the presentation, you'll know that it's an important topic and that everyone should be paying attention to it. A couple of things. One, I'm recording the audio with this, and in a couple of days, we'll have it synced up with my slides. And if you would like to know where it gets posted on our website, get my card and make sure I get your card. So then I'll email you the slides and then the link to where this gets posted, so that if you want to go back and watch it, or if you want to share it with anybody, you're more than welcome to do that. And so, those are my cards passing around. And if you want me to mail you these slides directly, make sure I get your card before we leave today. So I have a 10 o'clock meeting, so a little over an hour and a half. So I have a little bit of time afterwards if you want to stick around and ask me any questions. So here's what we're going to talk about today. I'll give you a little bit of a background on me, and I'll try to include my fun fact there. And I'm going to just define what type 2 diabetes mellitus is, just so we have an understanding of what's going on. And then I'll give you 3 reasons as to why I think it's an important strategy for every organization to implement. And those are around the numbers, the cost, and the treatment. And then we'll talk about how you can have some ideas when you leave here today for the groups that you work with or consult with or know on what they can do to implement their own strategy. Now, what you may not realize, and it's my job to get that message across, is that we have a tidal wave coming down the healthcare system. And however bad you think the healthcare costs and the system is, it's going to be exponentially, and exponential is probably not a strong enough word, but if something doesn't change, it's going to be exponentially worse in 10, 15, or 20 years from now. And by the time I get through with particularly the numbers and the costs, I hope that you realize that. So a little bit about me. That's a picture of me from the Houston Business Journal. They did a story on me and our company about 3 years ago now. And so it was one of those 2-page articles where that picture took up 2/3 of one of the pages. So you get to see a bigger version of that picture. My background is, in terms of education, I have PhD in physiology and statistics from the University of Houston. I worked for about 6 years or so at NASA Johnson Space Center. I worked in the Space and Life Sciences Division. I'm not a rocket scientist, I'm an astronaut, or I was an astronaut scientist. And mainly the things that we worked on there were circulatory issues and exposure to zero gravity. So you may not know this, but your circulatory system is divided into 2 parts, the delivery and the return. And the return is based on gravity, so it doesn't work without gravity. So what happens to your whole system when you're in 0 Gs? That's kind of what we were looking at. After NASA, I got tired of working for the rapid pace of the federal government and took a state government job at University of Houston, and then really got tired of working for the government and started this company in August. It'll be 13 years ago. Now, in terms of personal, I'm married. I have 2 teenage daughters at home. One's a senior, graduating this year, and the other one's a freshman. All right, so what we're going to start off doing is we're going to define what is diabetes. Most of us think that type 2 diabetes is a problem with blood sugar. And the reality is there's 2 kinds, there's actually 3 kinds, but there's really only 2 kinds that we talk about in terms of types of diabetes. There's type 1 diabetes, which used to be called juvenile diabetes, when the kids find out from their doctor they're dehydrated and thirsty all the time, and they have all these other symptoms, and they go to see the doctor, and they find out, oh, you have diabetes. That kind of diabetes, type 1, used to be called juvenile, is a type of diabetes where your pancreas doesn't produce insulin. And so when you're a type 1 diabetic, you have to come up with a way, typically with a pump, to introduce insulin into the system so that it can work on your blood sugar and control all of your systems. The other kind of type 2 diabetes, other kind of diabetes is type 2. And of 100% of all cases of diabetes, 95 or 96% are type 2. And that's primarily a lifestyle-based condition. And the difference between type 1 and type 2 is in type 1, your body doesn't produce insulin. In type 2, your body produces insulin, it just doesn't work. And so in both types of diabetes, blood sugar is up, and it's not going down. In type 1, it doesn't go down because insulin's job is to do that. And so type 1s don't have insulin, they're not producing it, so that's why blood sugar stays up, and that's why they need insulin to help bring it down. Type 2s, they have insulin, it just doesn't work. So that's why it's called insulin resistance or non-insulin dependent diabetes mellitus. But that's what the 2 types are. Both of them result in problems with blood sugar, but they're caused by either insulin not working or absence of insulin. And so that's what type 2 diabetes is. And the approach to treatment, whether it's right or wrong, and I'll talk about that here in a little bit, is to control the level of blood sugar or glucose into the system. So the first reason why I think every organization, whether it's a solo entrepreneur or Exxon or Walmart or whomever, needs to implement a type 2 diabetes strategy is the numbers. Here's a table from the CDC, and you can look at this table, and it says approximately 30 million Americans have type 2 diabetes. 21 of those are diagnosed, and 8 something are undiagnosed. Now, that's a lot of people, and it's more than 10% of the adult population in the United States. These numbers are also wrong. The real number is for U.S. adults, 52% have some form of type 2 diabetes. They're either diagnosed, they're this fairly new term called pre-diabetic, or they have it and don't know. 52%. 2013, I think, was the last U.S. census. Does anyone know how many adults there are in the U.S.? The CDC counts adults as being 18 and older. Does anyone know what that number would be? 240 million adults. And so if you cut that number in half, that's how many people are walking around with some form of type 2 diabetes. So it's not 30 million. That's about 25% of the real number. And so why is this number wrong? Well, when you go to work every day and you have to renew your insurance, you go through this annual health check, the HRA, or biometric screening, whatever your company calls it. They do fasting blood sugar, right? Well, the fasting blood sugar number tells you what your glucose is. And that's a terrible number to use to make a diagnosis, which is why these numbers are wrong. So the reason it's a terrible number, it actually and accurately measures what your blood sugar is. But fasting blood sugar isn't an accurate predictor of diabetes because it's very sensitive to all kinds of things. So the people that are administering these tests, they know that. So they often don't act on high numbers. So they don't say, your blood sugar is high, you need to go see your doctor. So a lot of times that stuff gets swept under the rug, and that's why we have real numbers that are saying 52% of the adult population has some form of type 2 diabetes when the CD says, it's only 30 million people. So that's the first problem. Our numbers are much, much higher than what we're told they are. And when I get to the strategies, I'll talk about another kind of test that you can use that's much more accurate. The second reason every company should consider implementing a strategy is the cost. Of these three conditions, which do you think is the most expensive to have? Hepatitis, cancer, or type 2 diabetes?
Type 2 diabetes because it's chronic.
Type 2 diabetes because it's chronic?
It's ongoing.
Anybody have any differing opinion or guess?
I would have guessed it was cancer.
You would have guessed it was cancer? Well, the answer is type 2 diabetes. If we look here, and you can see on the bottom left, this was an article published in JAMA, which is the Journal of the American Medical Association, the flagship journal in medicine. They tracked 155 of the most diagnosed conditions in the country for 13 years, from 1998 to 2013 or something like that. Maybe if it's 15 or 16 years. But when they track out-of-pocket expenses for individuals, that's what personal expenses means. Type 2 diabetes, this figure is in billions of dollars. Out-of-pocket expenses for type 2 diabetics is $101.4 billion. In that list of 155 conditions, there were 26 types of cancers. That was, if you add all of them up, it was only $87.6 billion. So type 2 diabetes is much more expensive than cancer. Yes, ma'am.
And one thing that everybody's got to keep in mind, it's not so much just because it's diabetes itself, which we have to do constantly monitor, but it's the complications from diabetes that drive that number up.
That's correct. And that's part of the treatment problem that comes up next. Yes, ma'am.
Maybe because the cancer patient, they don't live as long.
Well, that's another issue. Right, that's another issue for cancer and hepatitis. Those treatments and drugs, they receive a lot of press because they're expensive. But the Harvoni and the other hepatitis drugs, they may be $3,000 or $4,000 or even $10,000 a month. But for most of those, you take them only for 8 to 11 months and then you're cured. Same thing with cancer. The vast majority of people are done with the most expensive part of treatment within 2 years. Because either you're cured or you're somewhere else, right? But with type 2 diabetes, you can have that condition for 25 years. And the longer you have it, the worse it gets because it increases your risk for cancer. It increases your risk for many forms of dementia. And then, of course, you hear all the other things about kidneys and vision and sores and amputations and everything else. I don't know if you guys ever noticed this, but I do. 15 or 20 years ago, you had to look and find a dialysis clinic. Now you can see them everywhere. That's because of diabetes. So it's expensive. This is out-of-pocket expenses for the individuals. And so you may say, well, what does it equate to in terms of insurance or what impact does the company expense have? It's going to be the same, because whether you're self-funded or fully insured through United or Aetna or Blue Cross, you're just paying the company is paying a portion of that cost. And so that portion is still going to end up with this same order here. And let me give you a scenario here. So let's say a typical company has 5,000 employees. Under their current HRA and biometric screening, they may have 20% that are type 2 diabetic, or roughly 1,000 of them. In reality, they've got about 2,500. They're just not screening them properly. Of those 1,000 that they know about, 400 are on insulin. Type 2 diabetics also need insulin eventually. And if you don't know, insulin costs about $400 a month for each prescription. So those 400 people cost that company $160,000 a month. And then that turns out to be almost $2 million a year for one drug. What if they actually had the right numbers, so that instead of 1,000, they've got 2,500 that are type 2 diabetic. So then we go from 400 to 800 that are on insulin because they need it. Then you're looking, instead of almost 2 million, you're looking at $4 million in one drug for one company. So it's a problem. Reason number 3 why I think companies should implement some kind of strategy around type 2 diabetes is the way we treat it. When we go see the doctor, our primary care physician or endocrinologist, we are, and it's not just for diabetes, it's for every chronic condition, but diabetes in particular, we are treating a symptom of the problem. So when you go see the doctor, they talk to you about your diet and your diabetic exchanges. They talk to you about taking your medication to control your blood sugar. And then they say you probably need to lose weight, so they tell them to get some exercise. But the point of what all of their goals are to control blood sugar primarily through medication. Now, earlier we said that type 2 diabetes, blood sugar is elevated because insulin doesn't work. Right? You guys remember that? Well, what we're doing with this approach to treatment is giving medication that is replacing the job that insulin is supposed to be doing. So the medication reduces blood sugar. The problem with type 2 diabetes isn't blood sugar. The problem is the insulin is not working. And so when we give medication to reduce the blood sugar, we're not doing anything to affect the resistance of insulin. So the first thing a type 2 diabetic hears when they get diagnosed by their doctor is you're going to have this condition for the rest of your life. And they're told that because it's true if they follow this path to treatment. And the reason is because we're giving medication to treat a symptom, we're not doing anything to treat the problem. So insulin resistance is the problem. The medication that is being given is with the objective of controlling blood sugar. So insulin resistance never improves. That's why when medication runs out, you have to get it refilled, or your blood sugar goes back to 200 or 300 or whatever it normally is. And that's the problem. And if you look at type 2 diabetics, they're very different in a number of ways. Because of insulin resistance and a chronically elevated blood sugar, they really struggle to burn fat tissue. So our marathon runner here has a fundamentally different metabolism than a type 2 diabetic. Your body can burn fat like nobody's business, but a type 2 diabetics can't. So they struggle to lose weight. They struggle with energy. They struggle with being hungry all the time.
But is that always true?
I'm sorry?
But is that always true?
I'm sorry?
You say type, each body's different, even with type 2 diabetics.
Mhm.
Not all type 2 diabetics have weight problems or have problem controlling their weight.
When they first get diagnosed, they do.
I did.
Then you were walking around diabetic for a long time before you got diagnosed. Yeah. Yeah. So what happens then when your insulin has stopped working, then everything gets dumped into your digestive system, all the fluids, and you start passing out everything through the urine because your body doesn't know what to do with it anymore. So that's what's happening.
Well, I was never a fat guy anyway, so.
Well, there's a difference between being overweight and fat and having too much body fat
Yeah.
as well. So you can be a skinny fat person as well. So it's not just what the scale says. So burning fat and metabolism and all these things are fundamentally different. And so what do we do from a wellness perspective is we tell them to, eat less food, focus on their diabetic exchanges, and do more exercise. That's like putting a square peg into a round hole. Eating less food and doing more exercise is fine for the people that are active, that can run half marathons or marathons or do CrossFit or any of these other types of things. But for the 52% of people that are at risk, undiagnosed or diagnosed, this doesn't work. I heard a doctor one time say, telling a diabetic to eat less food and do more exercise is like throwing a person that doesn't know how to swim into the deep end of a pool and telling them to swim faster because they're drowning. It doesn't fit with all of the metabolic and health picture that they have. So you have to do things differently. But with this approach, all we're doing is kicking that can down the road. Since our approach to treating this problem isn't fixing the problem, it's just kicking the can down the road. People that are at risk or diagnosed, they get pushed from an environmental perspective. They get pushed onto this treadmill that leads them to an unhealthy lifestyle. At the end of this treadmill, they get diagnosed and then they fall off the cliff. And they're stuck in our healthcare system and they can't get out. And the healthcare system is pulling money out of them every month to refill their prescriptions, and they have no chance following those instructions to get out. And the problem is, because there's over half of the adult population that is at risk for this, and because no one gets out, it only gets bigger. And so in 15 to 20 years from now, because you can live a long time with type 2 diabetes, the population, the pool of people with type 2 diabetes is only going to get bigger. And it's going to get exponentially bigger. And so that's where this idea that we have a tidal wave heading our way comes from. Because we're not doing a very good job from a healthcare perspective of helping people either not get diabetes or getting them healthy enough to where they don't have it anymore once they've been diagnosed. You see what I'm saying? That population just continues to grow and grow and grow. And if it's only $101 billion a year now, what's it going to be in 20 years? Because the only attrition in that group is when people die. The only appreciable attrition in that group is when people die. Otherwise, it just keeps growing.
Are they going to be doing any research to go after the root cause?
Well, that's kind of a loaded question. If there were incentives for pharmaceutical companies to make a drug that could be prescribed that would improve insulin resistance, they'd be all over it. But historically, all funding and research and reimbursement rates and everything else has been geared towards medication that control blood sugar. So unless there's a major shift in there, I don't see that happening. And all this stuff about, with the Affordable Care Act that was passed several years ago, and prevention is supposed to be free and all this other stuff, hospitals and doctors aren't going to do that because they don't get paid for that. They only get paid when they get reimbursed. And wellness and prevention isn't a reimbursable thing. I mean, they may get a little bit, but it's not enough for them to invest time in because they're not going to make any money off of it, unfortunately. And the other thing is, the way you improve insulin resistance and get better is lifestyle. And it's hard to patent and trademark a pill that does that. It may be impossible to do. And so this is the sad thing, because if we don't do something, and we're working on it, and some other groups are working on it, but, you know, if I could work with 1 million people a year in 10 years, that's only 10 million people. We got 120 that need help. So these are the problems, and what do we need to do? Well, what we do is, our company is called the Academy, and you have to do things differently. You have to be the red pea in the green pod. You have to kind of swim upstream to make this stuff work. Now, as a company, you can do this. And how can a company do this? Well, they can talk to their vendor, whoever does their biometric screening. And so if you guys are with a company, or if you have clients that are companies, what you can do is, when they do their annual screening, tell them to talk to their vendor, or if it's your company, you talk to your vendor, whoever does the screening, and say, I don't want fasting blood sugar. I want you to measure the HbA1c number. And it's the same blood test. So if they're doing a finger stick, they can still do that. They just have to analyze it differently. This is almost 100% accurate in diagnosis. This is where that 52% number comes from, using HbA1c. So it's like a 3-month control of blood sugar, average blood sugar numbers. It's a much, much better number to use. And the best thing about it is, there's no change in your annual screening. Just tell your vendor to do it. Because from an employee perspective, or from your perspective, it's the same finger stick. So the same one that they click on your finger to do your cholesterol and blood sugar, they can do your A1C. You don't need to do anything different. You just need to request it. And tell them that you want it. If they can't do it or won't do it, then they're doing you a disservice, and you need to find someone that can. That's as cut and dried as it can be.
Yeah, that's the most important number, whether you're diabetic or not, because it's taken over a 90-day reading of it.
Correct. Yeah, it's a 90-day number of average blood sugar control, and it comes back as a percentage, and a lot of endocrinologists use it to diagnose diabetes and to monitor your progress. So you can get this number on all of your employees, and you can get a great, accurate snapshot of general health and all kinds of good stuff. So that's the first thing an organization should do, is start doing A1C in their annual screenings. That's an easy thing to do. And then the second thing is, you need to make sure that the message is that we're going to do something about type 2 diabetes within our employee population, and everyone needs to be on board. Not just the employee benefits person, not just a wellness coordinator, but it needs to be a message from the C-suite down, so that the guy that's working somewhere, you know, off-site or whatever, knows that this is important for the company. And then you also have to kind of change the way you think about things. I've been doing this, started this company almost 13 years ago, but you have to change how you view people. Nobody likes taking medication. Nobody wants to take medication. They really would like to get off of it, but in the Why Wellness Fails presentation that I gave last time I was here, those programs are terrible for people that need help. And they're not helpful, so those guys think, well, this isn't working for me, so this isn't going to be helpful. Then they go see their doctor and are told, I'm going to have this condition for the rest of my life, so they kind of give up. And then we as leaders within an organization think that that's the way it is. But I can tell you, doing this for so long, and all the people that I've worked with, if someone's on medication, and within 2 minutes, I can discover why they're saying that, and they really don't want to be on those medications for a bunch of different reasons. And so if you give people the opportunity to get off, they'll take it. And the problem is we haven't given them a good opportunity to do that with all the wellness services that we provide them.
I'd like to get off mine, I'm on 7.
You're on 7? So we're about to, that's not surprising, we're about to hopefully implement some of our programs with Amegy Bank. And so the VP of HR was telling me a story a couple of months ago that she was feeling weird. She went, I guess she wasn't fine, but everything was fine except for feeling weird. And she went to her doctor, and before she got back to the office, they called her and said to come back. She was type 2 diabetic. And so the day before, she was taking no medication, no diabetes, no nothing. And then by the time she left the doctor's office the second time, she was on 9 prescription medications. 9 in like an hour and a half. So, yeah, they just start piling them on. And then the third thing you need to do is look for vendors. There are vendors that do what we do. You have to be careful, though, because you got to make sure that they're getting the outcomes that they want. And so we do this with a program called the Academy. I'll just talk about it for a couple of minutes. It's based on 4 different things. It's not just counting calories from the food you eat and how many calories you burn. It's much more involved than that. It's based on food, sleep, stress, and exercise. When we work with companies, we can implement it on site, do it online, any kind of combination in between. And when we end up talking to people about eating meals like this, it looks good, tastes good, and it's nice and healthy. And so people follow this all the time. And then we get people sleeping like their dogs. It may not seem like a big deal, but half of the general population is walking around sleep deprived at any one moment. And while feeling tired may be kind of an annoyance or a nuisance, there is not one chronic condition on the planet that lack of sleep isn't associated with. All of those 155 conditions that I talked about from that list of costs, lack of sleep is associated with all of them. So you've got to make sure that your employees and you are resting at night and getting enough quality and quantity of sleep. So we have a program that's focused on that. And of course, we talk about stress all the time. Everyone knows stress is important. You've got to manage it. You can't eliminate it. In fact, you probably don't want to eliminate it because exposing your body to some stress every once in a while is a good thing. If it's chronic, it's a problem. And then when it comes to exercise, we think about how many calories we burn as a general rule. And really, that's important. But what's more important is how long you exercised and how did your body burn calories. So particularly if you're a type 2 diabetic, how you're burning those calories is important because remember a few slides ago we said that type 2 diabetics have a hard time burning fat. Well, if you're exercising in a way that doesn't help you burn fat, you may be doing counterproductive things. So you've got to figure out a way to exercise and do it in such a way that your body is burning calories the way it needs to. And so those are things that we talk about. And, just like being the red pea in a green pod, you're going to be, you have to get the message across. And if you're a diabetic, you have to understand. You can sit here and listen to me and tell you all of this stuff. But as soon as you walk out the door, the entire environment is against you being healthy. The entire environment. Whether it's your neighbor down the street trying to sign you up with these multi-level marketing magical pill supplements, whether it's the grocery store and how they stack items for you to buy that are unhealthy for you. How many times has anyone walked into H-E-B or Kroger or whatever looking only for a gallon of milk and were mad that you had to walk all the way to the farthest part of the store to get a gallon of milk and walked out with something else? There's a reason for that. There's a reason why cereal that's targeted for 6-year-olds is in the middle shelf. Because when you put them in the cart, that's what they see. Everything's done for a reason, and they don't understand how it adversely affects your health. They understand that it's more likely you're going to buy it. H-E-B does a good job of funneling you through the produce and then dumping you out at the bakery, right? And then by the time you're walking through the produce, all you can smell is the donuts and the bread and the tortillas that they're making, right? If they put that in the back, you would never buy them. Or their sales would go down 70% probably. But they put it there for a reason. And that's part of it. So the whole environment is geared towards pushing you on this treadmill that I referred to a while ago. So it's really hard. So you're going to have to steel yourself against everyone else's best intentions of telling you what to do and the environment and all the messages that you get. And then in the end, you'll be the happy little guy, nice and yellow and not sad. And then we have, we don't market to individuals, but when I do presentations like this, we give people discounts for signing up for our programs. There's 2 different options there for individuals. There's one with monthly coaching, and there's one completely online. And if you do this as an individual, we have a 100% guarantee. Whatever you pay us, if you follow the recommendations that we have, and you don't get off your medications, you don't reach your goals, we'll give you your money back. Because what we tell you to do works, and if you do that, it's going to be helpful.
Are there ways to get off like chronic, lifelong conditions? Like in most circumstances, I can see some of my pills and probably gone away, but other ones like.
Well, it depends on what the condition is. So if it's like something you're born with, probably not.
Something not born with, but like something like thyroid or heart.
Well, thyroid, yes. And heart, it would depend on what the medication is geared towards doing. But in terms of, the Academy is focused on helping 3 people, those with high cholesterol, or 3 people. 2 groups of people, those that are at risk for diabetes, high blood pressure, or high cholesterol, or those that have any combination of those 3 things. And so those are medications. I mean, if you look at anyone's top 10 prescription drug list from their broker, that's probably 70% of the list. But those are things that we help people get off of. And in terms of diabetes, that's the one we have the highest percentage of success with. And it's also allowed me, I have a book coming out on type 2 diabetes, 10 steps to breaking the system and beating type 2 diabetes and it's kind of a summary of what we talked about today. But most of our revenue comes with groups. So if you have groups from an individual up to 10,000 employees or more, we can work with them and their employees that implement our stuff there. So we can give them a discount if they mention this presentation, which would be great. And then if you wanted to connect with me, here's a bunch of ways to do that. LinkedIn is, for business perspectives, just reach out to me on LinkedIn, follow me or send me a connection request. These will be posted there as well, but I'm happy to email them to you directly. Just make sure I get your card before we leave. And it's right at 9 o'clock, so if you have questions, I will answer them. Otherwise, thanks for allowing me to come speak to your group. I hope you learned something today, and I hope you got the message, or I hope that I was able to effectively get across the message that doing something about diabetes within an organization is very important to do. So thank you. If you have any questions, I'll answer them.
What is your